An unexpected ally has jumped to the defense of Dr. Ben Carson. Well, sort of. Now, according to The Hill, on Sunday's Meet the Press, Senator Bernie Sanders actually went on the attack against media when it comes to their attacks on Ben Carson. Now, let's take a look at this clip.
Let me quickly ask you about this Ben Carson stuff, because you have seen some people leak out stuff you wrote 30 and 40 years ago. Is this fair game?
No. And look, I listened to the interviews with Dr. Carson, and it's interesting. But you know what, Chuck? The American people want to know why the middle class of this country is disappearing, why we have 47 million people living in poverty, why we have massive income and wealth inequality. When you look at Dr. Carson, to the best of my knowledge, this man does not believe that climate change is caused by human activity. This man wants to abolish Medicare, impacting tens of millions of seniors. And this man wants to give huge tax breaks to the rich. I think it might be a better idea. I know it's a crazy idea, but maybe we focus on the issues impacting the American people and what candidates are saying, rather than just spending so much time exploring their lives of 30 or 40 years ago. And I think the reason that so many people are turned off to the political process has a lot to do with the fact that we're not talking about the real issues impacting real people.
Well, I know it's a crazy idea, but let's actually talk about the issues. God bless your soul, Bernie Sanders. That's why we love you, man. But see, here's where I'm going to agree with him, right? I think we do spend too much time on other issues and not enough time on actual policy positions. I agree with that. But there's also a part where I disagree. And here's where that is, right? The media also should be vetting statements made by candidates. That's where I disagree with the esteemed Senator Sanders on. Why? Well, okay. Well, it's because of the very reason that people like Bernie Sanders to begin with. Honesty and integrity. You know you could trust Senator Sanders because he says what he means and does what he says, right? Ben Carson, however, is not that guy. He hasn't been honest with you. He hasn't been honest about his life. And he's also actually drawn a very, very dangerous narrative to try to appeal with far-right voters. In fact, I want to get into that a little bit. This narrative that he's been drawing was that he used to be a violent thug, right? Like, think of the far-right kind of version of a black person, right? He's a thug, he's violent, on welfare. He's not in with Jesus. He's a savage that needs to be tamed. Well, here's Ben Carson painting that picture of himself as a teen. I tried to stab my friend. I tried to throw chairs at people. I tried to hit my mom in the head with a hammer. I was a violent thug. But then I found Jesus. And then everything was right with the world. I spent time in the bathroom reading a specific Bible verse about having a temper. And then suddenly I was cured. Like an hour later, I was cured. Really? Interesting. That's the kind of narrative that he's tried to push about himself. A reformed thug. Because of Jesus. Now, that goes out very, very well with the religious right crowd. They eat that stuff up with a spoon. They don't care if it's true or not. They love this reformed thug story. Love it, love it, love it. That sort of explains why Dr. Carson has been rising in the polls, why he's number one. And also part of this narrative is that his appearance there, right? His leadership, his whatever, him being where he's at, he wants to kind of teach us a lesson. See, other black youth, you can be like me if you pull up your pants, grab a pair of bootstraps, love Jesus, and you could be just like me and work hard. You could be Dr. Carson. You could be president someday. This is the reason you vet candidates, because a lot of that isn't true. Don't get me wrong, Dr. Carson is a good neurosurgeon, and you have to be talented. He's got gifted hands, but he certainly does not have a gifted brain. And those are two different things. They shouldn't be allowed to get away with these kind of fabrications. The stuff that he's been getting away with. Now remember, CNN recently actually tried to talk to Carson's former classmates about how supposedly violent he was. It kind of underpins this entire story, right? And they were like, no, that's not true. Ben Carson wasn't at all like that. We would have remembered if he was that bad. He wasn't. He was nerdy. He walked around with a pocket protector. He was a nerd. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a nerd. I love nerds. Nerds are good. We're smart people. But that goes against this story that he tries to sell to Republican voters. It's the story that they want to hear. And sadly, it's sickening. Kind of how dishonest this whole thing. Making up things, fabricating your past in order to get in better with an electorate to sell the story, to get votes. It just seems like a really sickening thing to do. But it kind of shows how dirty and how dishonest American politics is. So yes, I do agree with Sanders on the fact that we should talk about Dr. Ben Carson's policies, which are terrible, by the way. And we should all talk about them. We should talk about how terrible they are, how bad they are for America, Americans in general. I mean, his tax system is based on the Bible. It's based on tithing. That's a ridiculous system. And besides, even Jesus was for rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Pay your fucking taxes. It's ridiculous, but let's talk about that, yes. But we also, I think it's also fair to challenge and vet candidates about their pasts too, because, let's be honest, it does say a lot about their character and especially how they react to scrutiny. If you can't handle the media asking you a few questions, a few tough questions about your past without blowing up or melting down or blaming the media for being overly biased, which, look, in some cases they can be, totally. But if you can't handle that, how are you expected to handle Putin? How are you expected to handle any situation where your authority has been challenged? Well, look at Barack Obama. Look at all the heinous things they've said about him on the media on Fox News. The guy laughs it off, stays cool as a cucumber. That's presidential. Whining about an unfair media, that's not presidential. And it shows ill of your character.